25 years ago, a boy vanished from an elite private school. Now his classmates have returned for a reunion. One of them dies on stage. His last word is key.
The Blackwood Reunion Prologue, The Word. Blackwood Hall had always looked better in the rain, which was convenient because most places built on money, fear, and old stone benefited from poor visibility. The school stood on a hill above the village like a verdict that had been paid for in advance. Black slate roofs, narrow windows, ivy strangling the west wing, a chapel bell tower cutting into the gray evening sky, and a gravel drive lined with oaks that looked old enough to have watched several generations of boys learn cruelty and call it leadership. The reunion banner hung above the main entrance in heavy cream cloth with dark blue letters, Blackwood Hall, Class of 1999, 25 years of excellence. The word excellence had been chosen by a committee, which explained why it sounded both expensive and untrue. Inside the Great Hall, the school had done what elite institutions always did when history became inconvenient: polished the wood, lit the candles, hung photographs, served champagne, and trusted that enough Latin would make guilt look like tradition. The old-school motto had been painted above the stage in gold, per silentium ad lucem, through silence toward light. It was the sort of motto adults admired until children understood it literally. Beneath it stood a lectern, a silver school cup, a microphone, and a framed black and white photograph of the graduating class of 1999. 26 boys and girls in formal uniforms, neat ties, dark blazers, smiles ranging from bored to vicious. One empty space near the left edge where someone had clearly once stood before being removed from the official print. Not erased perfectly, just enough to insult the eye. At 7:30, the old classmates began filling the hall, no longer children, no longer innocent, and in several cases, no longer legally affordable. They arrived as judges, financiers, media men, consultants, surgeons, charity trustees, political advisors, brand strategists, and other socially acceptable disguises for ambition. They kissed cheeks, they shook hands, they compared divorces through jokes. They praised the school food now that no one had to eat it daily. They spoke warmly of teachers they once feared and traditions they once survived by making someone else suffer them first. At the center of the room moved Daniel Cross, former head boy of Blackwood Hall, now a rising member of Parliament, donor, patron, guest of honor, and professional owner of rooms. Daniel aged into exactly the man his 17-year-old self had advertised, handsome in a carved, public way, silver just beginning at the temples, jaw clean, smile quick, voice trained to sound sincere without risking sincerity. He wore a dark suit and a Blackwood tie because men like Daniel never stopped wearing uniforms. They simply changed the price. He greeted people with both hands, remembered names selectively, laughed at old jokes before anyone finished them, and touched the silver school cup once as he passed the lectern, the way a general might touch a captured cannon. Watching him near the drinks table was Eleanor Vane, once the cleverest girl in the class, now a high court judge with a face built from discipline and expensive restraint. Eleanor wore black, no unnecessary jewelry, and the calm expression of a woman who had spent 20 years making other people answer questions under oath, while carefully avoiding several of her own. Beside the old fireplace was Marcus Reed, former rugby captain, now owner of a chain of elite fitness clubs and wellness retreats where rich men paid to be shouted at in renovated barns. He had the body of a man still fighting time and the eyes of someone who knew time was winning on appeal. Near the back, half hidden by a pillar, was Clara Finch, former scholarship student, now investigative journalist, hair shorter than it had been in the old photographs, smile sharper, posture looser, eyes busy. Clara had not come to celebrate. That much was clear to anyone still capable of looking. By the bar, Thomas Bell, once class clown, now television comedian and podcast host, made jokes loud enough to remind everyone laughter had protected him from responsibility. In a wheelchair near the stage sat headmaster Alastair Graves, 90 if he was a day, wrapped in a school scarf, face collapsed into parchment, eyes still wet and clever in a way that suggested the body had decayed faster than the instinct to conceal. Behind him stood the current headmistress, smiling hard enough to hurt, and near the archive display, holding a tray of old programs no one wanted, stood a man almost nobody recognized. His name badge read Samuel Price, school archivist. That was not entirely true. He'd been hired as a temporary archivist 3 months ago to organize the old Blackwood records before the reunion. But 25 years ago, his younger brother was Andrew Price, the scholarship boy who vanished from Blackwood Hall after what the school report called a disciplinary episode and probable voluntary flight. Andrew was 15. His suitcase was later found near the village bus stop. His body had not been found at all. Schools loved phrases like probable voluntary flight. They sounded administrative. They avoided words like blood, panic, locked doors, missing inhaler, and boys who laughed too hard while another boy begged to be let out. Samuel Price had his brother's eyes. That was the first thing Clara Finch noticed when she saw him. The second thing she noticed was that Daniel Cross saw him too, and for one short second, the public smile on Daniel's face forgot its training. Then it returned, brighter than before, which made it worse. The evening began with champagne, photographs, and a short speech from the current headmistress about heritage, excellence, and the sacred duty of forming character. Thomas Bell whispered that Blackwood had mostly formed lawyers and eating disorders. Clara heard him and said nothing. Marcus Reed laughed too loudly. Eleanor Vane did not laugh at all. Daniel Cross moved through the room, collected praise, and checked his watch 3 times. At 8:10, he leaned toward Eleanor near the stage and said something too quietly for anyone else to hear. Eleanor's face changed by a fraction. Not much. Enough. She said one word.
"Tonight?" Daniel smiled. "Tonight." Eleanor looked toward the old class photograph. "Don't be theatrical, Daniel. My dear Eleanor, theater is what Blackwood taught us instead of morality." She stepped closer. "If you are drunk, stop talking." "I'm not drunk. That makes this less forgivable." Daniel's smile thinned. "Relax. I'm not here to confess. I'm here to collect." Eleanor went still. Daniel touched her shoulder lightly, the way men touch people when they believe history belongs to them. "Smile," he said. "You look judicial." Across the room, Samuel Price watched them. So did Clara Finch. So did Headmaster Graves, though his face gave away nothing except age and perhaps the faint inconvenience of still being alive. At 8:20, the guests were called to take their places. The great hall settled into rows of old classmates, spouses, donors, staff, and a few current prefects invited to witness tradition before it eventually learned their names, too. Daniel stepped onto the stage to applause. Behind him hung the class photograph. Beside him stood the silver cup, polished to a mirror shine. The microphone waited. The old motto gleamed overhead. Daniel adjusted his cuffs, placed both hands on the lectern, and gave the room the smile he used in Parliament when denying knowledge of things he had almost certainly arranged. "Blackwood," he began, "taught us many things." Thomas Bell murmured, "How to lie in Latin." A few nearby guests laughed. Eleanor did not. Clara did not. Samuel Price stood near the archive table with his hands behind his back, watching Daniel like a man watching a locked door. Daniel continued, warm and easy. "It taught us discipline, loyalty, ambition. It taught us that privilege, when properly understood, is not comfort but responsibility. Luke Veyron would have thrown something. Edward Hale, had he been present, would have left from second-hand embarrassment. But Edward was not there yet, for now Daniel Cross owned the room. He spoke about teachers, houses, competitions, lost youth, long friendships. He spoke about the new scholarship fund, funded by his donation, intended to give children from every background access to Blackwood's values. Clara Finch almost laughed at that, then decided the sound would give away too much. Samuel Price did not move. Daniel turned a page. His hand paused there. He looked down at the speech, then up at the room, then strangely at Eleanor. She shook her head once, tiny, almost invisible. Daniel smiled again, and this time there was something ugly behind it, something young and unchanged. "But we would be dishonest," he said, "if we pretended memory was only celebration." The room cooled. That was not metaphor. People stopped shifting glasses. Smiles tightened. Marcus Reed straightened near the aisle. Thomas Bell stopped whispering. Clara's eyes sharpened. Headmaster Graves closed one hand slowly over the edge of his blanket. Samuel Price leaned forward half an inch. Daniel lifted the silver cup from the lectern. This was part of the old tradition. Every head boy at reunions drank from the cup to the fellowship of Blackwood. A ridiculous phrase, naturally, but private schools schools survived by preserving ridiculous phrases until they became invoices. The cup had been filled with wine by the catering staff 10 minutes earlier under the eye of the head mistress. Daniel held it up. "To fellowship," he said. The room answered, weaker than expected. "To fellowship."
Daniel brought the cup to his lips. He drank only a little. Then he lowered it, blinked and looked annoyed, as if the wine had contradicted him. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then his right hand moved to his throat. The silver cup slipped from his fingers and struck the wooden stage with a heavy, ringing sound. Wine spread across the boards in a dark fan. Daniel grabbed the lectern, missed it, knocked the microphone sideways, and fell hard enough that the sound went through the hall like a dropped verdict. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for a doctor. Marcus Reed moved first with the old athlete's instinct, but stopped 2 steps from the stage as if his body had remembered something his mind refused to name. Clara Finch was already running. Eleanor Vane remained seated for 1 fatal second too long. Thomas Bell said, "Oh God," and sounded for once like a man who had run out of audience. Samuel Price did not move at all. He looked not at Daniel, not at the wine, not at the silver cup, but at the old photograph behind the lectern. Daniel Cross was still alive when Clara reached him. His eyes were wide, furious, terrified. His mouth worked. Clara bent close. "What? Daniel, what?" He tried again. His fingers clawed once at the spilled wine, then at the air, then curled as if closing around something small. He forced out 1 word. "Key." Then he convulsed, hit the stage boards once with his heel, and stopped. The hall lost its shape. People stood. Chairs scraped. The headmistress shouted for everyone to remain calm, which proved she had never understood either people or murder. A doctor from the alumni row began CPR. Someone called emergency services. A prefect vomited into a flower arrangement. Thomas Bell kept saying no, 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 though nobody had asked him a question. Marcus Reed backed away from the stage with his hands raised, as if distance could arrive retroactively. Eleanor Vane stood now, very pale, 1 hand gripping the back of her chair. Samuel Price finally moved. He walked to the archive display, picked up the old class photograph, and stared at the empty space near the left edge where Andrew should have been. Rain struck the tall windows. Above the stage, the motto shone calmly, through silence, toward light. 25 years earlier, in the basement corridor beneath the old chapel, Andrew Price had screamed through a locked door until his voice broke. Several children had heard him. 1 had held the key. None had opened it. That was not known yet, not officially. Officially, Daniel Cross had collapsed during a reunion toast, and his last word made no sense. Unofficially, 6 adults in the great hall knew exactly what word he had said and exactly why it should have stayed buried. At 22:14, Inspector Ashcroft called Edward Hale. "You're going to hate this," she said. Edward, who had been reading a report about a museum restoration lab and almost achieved peace, closed his eyes. "I've started measuring my life and how often you say that. Private school reunion, former head boy dead on stage, possible poisoning, last word, key." Edward opened his eyes. Was there a key near him? No. Then it wasn't about the current room. That was fast. Dying people rarely become crossword puzzles. They reach for the strongest association available. "There's more. There always is. Otherwise you would let me sleep. 25 years ago, a scholarship boy disappeared from the same class. Name Andrew Price. Officially ran away. His brother is now working at the school archive and was present tonight." Edward stood and reached for his coat. "Everyone will want the brother." "Yes. Don't give him to them." "I wasn't planning to gift wrap him." "Good. Secure the cup, the wine, the microphone, the speech pages, the class photograph, and any old keys in the hall." "All old keys?" "A private school. They'll have decorative keys, ceremonial keys, house keys, prefect keys, keys to rooms nobody should have locked children in. Take them all." Ashcroft paused. "You think the last word refers to the old disappearance. I think the dead man used the 1 word Blackwood Hall spent 25 years trying not to hear." He ended the call and looked out at the rain. Somewhere beyond London, in a hilltop school built to manufacture leaders, a man died under a motto about silence and light. Edward already knew which word mattered. Not murder, not poison, not reunion. Key. A key did not only open doors. Sometimes it locked them. Sometimes it remained in a pocket while a boy on the other side ran out of breath. And sometimes, 25 years later, it returned as the last word of a man who had finally discovered that old schools kept their secrets badly, but their pupils kept them worse.
Chapter 1. The Great Hall.
Edward Hale arrived at Blackwood Hall at 23:06, which was exactly the right hour for old schools because darkness improved architecture and made hypocrisy less reflective. The rain had turned the gravel drive into a long black ribbon under the police lights. The chapel tower stood above the roofs like a finger raised by a dead headmaster. Tall windows glowed yellow against the wet stone. Through one of them, Edward could see the great hall, the banners, the framed portraits, the frozen old grandeur of a place that had spent a century teaching children to confuse obedience with character. Inspector Ashcroft met him under the entrance arch, collar up, hair damp, mood already damaged. "You're going to hate the motto," she said. "I usually hate mottos before translation. Through silence, toward light." Edward looked up at the carved Latin over the door. "That is either educational branding or a confession. At this place, probably both." They went inside. The main corridor smelled of wet coats, polish, old wood, lilies, and panic. Alumni had been moved to classrooms and side rooms by police, though the rich ones had resisted more elaborately. Two current prefects sat on a bench outside the headmistress's office, pale and silent, still wearing ceremonial blazers as if uniform could protect them from seeing a man die. On the wall hung photographs of old cricket teams, debating societies, house captains, scholarship winners, and dead benefactors whose eyes seemed to follow anyone who looked too closely at the fees. Edward stopped before the class photograph displayed near the entrance. It was a copy of the same 1999 image from the stage, 26 students, one visibly altered space near the left edge. He leaned closer. The removal had not been done digitally with modern skill. Old retouching, physical print work. Someone had cut Andrew Price out of Blackwood history with the careful incompetence of a guilty institution, and then framed the result. "Subtle," Edward said. Ashcroft followed his gaze. "That's the missing boy?" "The absent one, yes. Missing is what people say when they dislike verbs." They entered the great hall. The room had been cleared except for forensic officers, 2 uniforms, the current headmistress, and a doctor giving a statement near the aisle. The stage stood at the far end under the gold motto. Daniel Cross's body had been removed, but the place where he fell remained marked in tape. The silver school cup sat bagged on a side table. The microphone leaned in its stand, slightly crooked. Speech pages lay in evidence sleeves. Wine had stained the old stage boards in a dark fan that looked too much like an accusation to be useful. Behind the lectern, the enlarged class photograph watched the room with its missing student. Edward did not approach the cup first. He approached the photograph. Ashcroft said, "You're ignoring the obvious weapon." "No, I'm letting it become embarrassed. The cup was used for the toast. Daniel drank, he died. Then either the cup is guilty or everyone wants it to be. Preliminary field tests showed nothing obvious in the wine." "Good. You say that when things become worse, because they become more interesting." Edward looked at the photograph. Daniel Cross was in the center, smiling with the confidence of a boy already practicing public cruelty. Eleanor Vane stood 2 places to his right, expression serious, chin lifted, hair tied back, one hand resting at her waist. Marcus Reed stood behind Daniel, broad already, one shoulder angled toward Andrew's missing space. Clara Finch was near the back, smaller than the others, unsmiling. Thomas Bell leaned sideways into the frame, pulling a comic expression. Andrew Price had been removed from the left edge, but not completely. A sleeve remained, a sliver of tie, a pale blur where a face had been rubbed away. And beside the empty space, on Eleanor Vane's neck, barely visible against the white shirt collar, hung a thin chain with something small at the end. Edward pointed.
"Get me the original." Ashcroft came closer. "Original photograph?" "Yes. We have the displayed copy." "No, I want the unaltered print, negative, archive proof, yearbook draft, anything before someone made this uglier." "Why?" "Because Daniel's last word was key and Miss Vane appears to be wearing one." Ashcroft looked sharply at the photograph. "You can see that?" "I can see something someone hoped we would call jewelry." The headmistress, who had been hovering with the tragic courage of administrators near donors, stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, I must object to the implication that a judge of Lady Vane's standing—" Edward turned. "Name." The headmistress blinked. "Dr. Margaret Ellery." Dr. Ellery, your guest died on stage. A boy disappeared from your school 25 years ago, and the class photograph has been visibly altered. If your instinct is to defend standing, please do it quietly and preferably in another room. Ashcroft coughed into her hand. It did not fully disguise the laugh. Dr. Ellery stiffened. This school has cooperated fully. No, this school has cooperated decoratively. There is a difference. The headmistress looked to Ashcroft for rescue. Ashcroft offered none. Edward moved to the lectern. Daniel's speech pages were arranged in order. The last page had a crease across the middle and a faint smear near the lower edge, perhaps from his hand. Edward read the final paragraph. It was bland donor language: scholarship, responsibility, future leaders. Then, beneath it, in Daniel's own handwriting, 3 words had been added in dark ink. Tell them tonight. Under A.P. The initials were circled once. A.P., Ashcroft said. Andrew Price. Or Daniel wanted everyone to think so. You think he was going to confess? No. Why not? Edward looked at the handwritten note. Because confessing men write differently. This is not guilt. This is leverage. Ashcroft nodded slowly. Backmail? Possibly. Or performance blackmail, which is worse because it expects applause. He turned to the microphone. It had been swabbed, no obvious residue. Daniel had touched it only briefly, according to footage. The cup had been filled by catering, placed by the headmistress, lifted by Daniel. He drank a small amount. The doctor reported rapid collapse, throat tightness, arrhythmia signs, seizure-like movement. Too fast for most ingested poisons, unless concentrated. But Daniel's last word had not been poison, wine, help, or a maim. It had been key. People dying reached backward when the present made no sense. Daniel had reached 25 years backward. Show me the video, Edward said. Ashcroft handed over the tablet. Edward watched without sound. Daniel on stage. Speech. The shift at memory was only celebration. Eleanor shaking her head. Daniel lifting the cup. Drinking. Lowering it. Annoyance. Throat. Collapse. Clara running. Marcus stopping. Eleanor frozen 1 second too long. Thomas pale. Samuel motionless, then turning not to Daniel, but to the class photograph. Edward rewound. Watched Eleanor. Rewound. Watched Marcus. Rewound. Watched Daniel's hand before the cup. He adjusted his cuff. Touched the lectern. Turned the page. Lifted the cup. Nothing dramatic. Then he drank. He looked annoyed before frightened.
He tasted something, Ashcroft said. Yes. Poison in the cup? Maybe, or something expected tasted wrong. Edward walked to the evidence table where the cup sat in a clear bag. Silver, old, polished, engraved with the Blackwood crest. Around the base, Per silentium ad lucem. On the inner rim, forensic prouder had caught several partial prints: Daniel's, catering staff, headmistress, older residue from decades of ceremonial handling. Edward looked at the rim, then at the base, then at the inside bottom. Who cleaned it before the toast? School steward, named Peter Wicks, 30 years here. 30 years? Yes. Then he knew Andrew Price. He says barely. Of course he does. Edward looked at the cup again. Something inside the stem caught the light. A faint line, recent polish over older tarnish near a seam. Not poison necessarily. A hiding place? Ceremonial cups often had removable bases. Schools loved objects that appeared solid and concealed rot structurally. Has the base been checked? Swabbed. Not opened. Ashcroft looked at him. It opens? Everything in schools opens, locks, or contains a dead tradition. He handed it back. Have forensics examine the base, carefully. No heroic twisting by people with pliers and confidence. Ashcroft signaled an officer. Dr. Ellery said, that cup is 19th century. Then it has plenty of time to become suspicious. A voice from the hall doorway said, it also leaks. Edward turned. Samuel Price stood there, escorted by a uniform, wearing a dark suit and a visitor's badge. Up close, the resemblance to the missing boy in the unaltered imagination of the photograph was obvious enough to be cruel. Same narrow face, same watchful eyes, same look of someone who had learned not to expect rooms to help. Ashcroft said, Mr. Price, you were asked to wait. I did, then I got bored of being silently accused through a door. Edward looked at him. You're the archivist. Temporary. And the brother. Permanent. Did you kill Daniel Cross? Samuel's mouth twitched. No, but I'd be lying if I said the thought never improved a bad morning. Dr. Ellery made a faint, shocked sound. Edward nodded. Better than denial with lace on it. Samuel looked at the stage. His last word was key. Yes. It wasn't about the cup. No. It was about Andrew. Likely. Samuel's eyes shifted to the altered class photograph. They cut him out. Yes. School said the original was lost. Schools lose what they keep best. Samuel looked back at him, and for the first time his face changed. Not hope. Something more dangerous. Recognition. I found a maintenance ledger, Samuel said. Old basement access, chapel corridor, archive room beneath the tower. The night Andrew vanished, a key was signed out. Ashcroft stepped closer. By whom? Samuel looked at the photograph. Eleanor Vane. Dr. Ellery said, That is impossible. Samuel did not look at her. It's in the ledger. Edward said, Where is it now?
In the archive safe. Who knows you found it? Samuel's silence lasted half a second too long. Edward's eyes sharpened. Mr. Price. Samuel exhaled. Daniel, Ashcroft said. You told Daniel Cross? He found me in the archive before the reception. I thought he'd try to stop me. Instead, he smiled and said he already knew about the key. Edward looked at the speech pages again. Then he wasn't going to confess. No, Samuel said. He was going to sell the room back its silence. Did he name Eleanor? Samuel nodded once. He said, Judges pay more than bullies. The hall went quiet around that sentence. Edward looked at the stage. Daniel's body was gone, but his shape remained in the room. Public, polished, rotten. He had not died as a repentant man. He had died as a blackmailer who had picked the wrong anniversary. Who had access to Daniel before the speech? Edward asked. Ashcroft checked notes. Eleanor spoke to him, Marcus Reed argued with him near the bar, Thomas Bell joked with him near the stage, Clara Finch confronted him briefly, Headmaster Graves asked for a private word, but Daniel refused. Samuel was at the archive table. Catering handled cup and wine, school steward polished the cup. Too many hands. That seems to happen around rich alumni. Edward looked at the cup, the speech, the photograph, Samuel, then the motto above them. Through silence toward light. No. Through silence toward careers. Find Eleanor Vane, he said. Ashcroft nodded. Samuel stepped forward. You think she killed him? I think Daniel died after saying the word that would destroy her. That sounds like yes. No, Edward said. It sounds like motive. Motive is not murder. Private schools produce motive in bulk. Samuel gave a bitter little smile. Finally, something Blackwood made well. Edward looked once more at the class photograph and the small shape on Eleanor's chain. Get the original photograph and the key ledger. Ashcroft moved. Edward remained in the great hall, beneath the motto, listening to rain strike the windows and old wood creak around the stage. The school had survived one missing boy by turning him into an administrative absence. Tonight, another old boy had died because absence had finally learned a word. Key. Not the answer yet, but the first door. Chapter 2. The Missing Boy. The archive safe sat beneath the old chapel corridor, which told Edward Hale everything he needed to know about Blackwood Hall's attitude toward truth, keep it underground, lock it twice, and build a place of moral instruction directly above it. Samuel Price led them down through a narrow stone passage behind the great hall, past a row of framed house shields and a locked display case full of old prefect badges, rusted sports medals, cracked debating trophies, and other small objects children had once been told mattered. The air changed as they descended, less polish, more damp. The school above smelled of money pretending to be history. The lower corridor smelled of mildew, paper, cold stone, and secrets stored by people who believed filing cabinets were a form of absolution. Inspector Ashcroft walked behind Edward with a torch in one hand and her patience in the other, visibly losing both. Dr. Ellery followed because headmistresses, like ghosts, were hardest to remove from the rooms they had failed to protect. Samuel stopped before a steel archive door that looked newer than the surrounding wall and took a key card from his pocket. "When was this installed?" Edward asked. 7 years ago, Samuel said, after a leak damaged part of the old admissions records. A leak? That's what the report said. Schools love leaks. Water gets blamed for things adults did with pens. Dr. Ellery said the archive was modernized to preserve institutional memory. Edward looked at her. "Then tonight will be productive." Samuel opened the door. The room beyond was low-ceilinged and lined with metal shelves. Archive boxes stood in neat rows, each labeled by year, house, department, disciplinary board, donor correspondence, medical records, maintenance, alumni affairs. A dehumidifier hummed in the corner with the weary persistence of a civil servant assigned to mold. On the central table lay 3 boxes Samuel had clearly prepared before the evening: 1998 to 1999 discipline, chapel access, A. Price, scholarship file. Edward did not praise him. Praise made useful people self-conscious. He simply pointed to the maintenance ledger. Samuel opened the chapel access box and removed a large black book with cracked corners and numbered pages. He turned to October 1998, then tapped one entry with a gloved finger. Ashcroft leaned in. Edward read the line once, then again. 31 October, 2140, Lower Chapel Archive Key. Signed out, E. Vane. Returned, 0015. Witness, A. Graves. The ink was faded but clear. Eleanor Vane's signature was neat, severe, and already adult in the most incriminating way. Edward looked at Dr. Ellery. She had gone pale.
"This ledger was not in the file given to police in 1999, Ashcroft said. Samuel's jaw tightened. "No, it was misfiled under boiler maintenance," Edward said. "Of course it was. Keys often suffer heating problems." Dr. Ellery said, "This proves only that Eleanor signed out a key. Students with prefect authority had access for supervised duties." Samuel turned sharply. "Andrew disappeared that night." Dr. Ellery's voice stayed tight. "Andrew Price left campus after a behavioral incident." "No," Samuel said, "that's the sentence your school sold my mother." Edward raised a hand. "Not yet." Samuel looked ready to argue, then stopped. "Good. Rage was useful only while aimed correctly." Edward turned the ledger page carefully. Earlier entries showed staff access, chapel cleaning, storage deliveries, choir equipment. No student names except prefects. Eleanor Vane signed out the lower archive key twice that term. Daniel Cross signed out the house office key regularly. Marcus Reed had no key entries. Thomas Bell, none. Clara Finch, none. Andrew Price, none. Headmaster Graves witnessed the key return after midnight. That meant Graves knew Eleanor had the key after whatever happened, and still the official report called Andrew's disappearance a voluntary flight. Edward looked toward the old scholarship file. "Andrew's medical records," he said. Samuel opened the box slowly. His hands did not shake, but the effort not to shake was visible. He removed a thin folder. Admission forms, scholarship recommendation, teacher reports, a photograph of Andrew Price at 15, narrow face, serious eyes, uniform slightly too big, hair combed badly because nobody at home had been trained in Blackwood's preferred forms of expensive neglect. Edward read the medical summary. Asthma, moderate, inhaler carried, known anxiety during respiratory distress, school nurse notified, emergency inhaler stored in the infirmary. He looked up. His inhaler was missing? Samuel said. The official report says he likely took it with him. Was it found? No. Suitcase at bus stop? Yes. Who found it?
Groundskeeper, 6 in the morning. Packed? Badly. Clothes thrown in. No school notebooks. No money. No inhaler. Edward nodded. A staged runaway by someone who had never run away from anything except consequences. Dr. Ellery whispered, "This is speculation." "No," Edward said. "This is document hygiene. Speculation is what your predecessor filed." Ashcroft opened the disciplinary box. The first folder was labeled Price, Andrew, Incident Report. The pages inside were clean, typed, formal, poisonous. Andrew accused several classmates of coercion, theft of personal property, harassment, and academic cheating. The report had been marked unsubstantiated. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Boy unstable, Scholarship pressure. Avoid escalation until governors briefed. A.G. Alistair Graves. Edward turned to the next page. A witness statement by Daniel Cross said Andrew had invented grievances after being excluded socially. Marcus Reed called him erratic. Thomas Bell said Andrew could not take jokes. Eleanor Vane's statement was shorter. I saw no physical assault. Andrew was upset and left voluntarily after chapel study. Clara Finch's statement was missing. "Where is Clara Finch's statement?" Edward asked. Samuel said, "There isn't one. She was in the class. She says she was never asked." Dr. Ellery said, "The original investigation was internal before police involvement." "Internal," Ashcroft said. "That word is doing a lot of grave digging tonight." Edward turned to another page. A prefect conduct note, a punishment log, Halloween night, a handwritten correction. Lower chapel corridor closed for maintenance. Closed, but the key signed out by Eleanor. Returned after midnight, witnessed by Graves. Andrew vanished between those times. He looked at Samuel. What did Daniel know? Samuel reached into his jacket and produced a folded photocopy. I found this in Daniel's archive request file after he confronted me. Ashcroft took it with gloves. Edward read over her shoulder. It was a copy of the ledger entry with the Eleanor signature circled. Beneath it, Daniel had written, EV pays, MR pays less, TB talks, CF dangerous, SP useful, Graves dying. Edward looked at Samuel. SP useful? Samuel's mouth tightened. Yes, me. And you let him know you had the ledger. I didn't let him, he saw it. Where? In the archive, this afternoon. I had the box open, he came down without warning. Why was he allowed in? Samuel looked at Dr. Ellery. Donor access. Dr. Ellery looked away. Edward said, naturally. Ashcroft folded the photocopy into an evidence sleeve. Did Daniel threaten you?
Samuel gave a short laugh. Daniel didn't threaten. He offered partnership in a tone that made refusal sound childish. He said if I wanted justice, I needed leverage. He said Blackwood only understood invoices, headlines, and judges. Edward looked at the ledger again. Judges. Yes. Did Eleanor know Daniel had this? Samuel hesitated. I think so. Why? Because after Daniel left the archive, he went straight to her. I followed to the upper corridor. I heard him say, "You should have kept the key, Ellie. Sentimental objects are expensive when photographed." That landed cleanly. Ashcroft wrote it down. Dr. Ellery put a hand to her throat, which Edward considered theatrical but not entirely false. Edward asked, "Did Eleanor have the key tonight?" Samuel shook his head. "I don't know. Did she wear a chain?" "Yes." "With a pendant?" "Yes." "Key-shaped?" "I didn't get close enough." Edward turned to Ashcroft. "Find Eleanor Vane. Secure any necklace, pendant, key, bag, medication, and phone. Politely first, legally second." Ashcroft nodded and stepped toward the door, but before she left, a voice came from the corridor. "You won't need to find me." Eleanor Vane stood in the doorway, still in black, still composed, but the composition had begun to cost her. Behind her, a uniformed officer looked apologetic. Eleanor looked past him as if apology were something junior people used instead of competence. She said, "I was told you were searching for me." Edward looked at the chain at her neck. A small gold pendant rested against the black fabric. Not a key, a cross. Too obvious? Perhaps. Her hands were empty. Her eyes went first to the ledger, then to Samuel, then to Edward. Not to Dr. Ellery. Interesting. "Lady Vane," Ashcroft said, "you should not be here." "I imagine nobody should be here. That seems to be Blackwood's central defense." Edward nodded slightly. "Good. Sit." Eleanor's eyebrows moved. "I beg your pardon?" "Not granted. Sit." She looked at Ashcroft. Ashcroft did not rescue her either. Blackwood Hall was having an educational evening. Eleanor sat at the archive table with judicial calm and a pulse visible at her throat. Edward tapped the ledger. "You signed out the lower chapel archive key on the night Andrew Price vanished." "Yes." Samuel inhaled sharply. He had expected denial. Edward had not. Eleanor continued,
I was a prefect. I signed out keys often. This one was returned at 0015, witnessed by Headmaster Graves. Yes. Where was Andrew? I don't know. Wrong answer. Her eyes cooled. It is the only answer I can give under the circumstances. No, it is the only answer that survived rehearsal. Eleanor looked at him.
You are very sure of yourself for a man holding a school ledger. I am holding a school ledger, a missing boy, a dead blackmailer, and your signature. Confidence would be vulgar. I am merely busy. Ashcroft looked down at her notebook. Again, not quite a laugh. Edward continued. Daniel Cross spoke to you before his speech. Yes. He said tonight, a flicker. Good. He told you he was going to collect. Eleanor said nothing. He had a copy of the ledger. He knew about the key. He planned to use it. I don't know what Daniel planned. Yes, you do. Daniel was not confessing. He was blackmailing. For the first time, Eleanor's expression changed into something close to contempt. Daniel Cross did not discover conscience in middle age. If he mentioned Andrew tonight, it was because someone had finally made guilt profitable. Samuel looked down. Edward asked, Did you kill him? No. Did you want him dead? Eleanor's answer came after a pause. Yes. Honest. Dangerous. Useful. Dr. Ellery made another sound. Eleanor ignored it. He was going to ruin you, Edward said. He was going to ruin several people. I dislike being placed first only because I became respectable. Did you lock Andrew in the lower chapel archive? Eleanor's face went still. No. Did you have the key? Yes. Did you open the door? No answer. Samuel stood. Answer him. Eleanor looked at Samuel then, properly perhaps, for the first time all night. I opened it later, she said. Samuel froze. Edward said, Later than what? Later than I should have. The archive room became very quiet. Even the dehumidifier seemed to lower its voice. Eleanor continued, each word controlled. Marcus and Daniel took him below after chapel study. Thomas followed. I had the key because I was prefect on corridor duty. Andrew had threatened to report cheating and the initiation games. Daniel said 10 minutes in the old archive would teach him the value of discretion. Samuel's face drained. And you locked him in. I turned the key, Eleanor said. Samuel moved like he might cross the table. Ashcroft stepped between them. Eleanor's voice tightened but did not break. I came back. The door had jammed. He was coughing. He was shouting. Marcus panicked. Daniel told us to shut up. Thomas cried. I went to find Graves. Graves knew. Yes. What did Graves do? He sent us back to our houses. He said he would handle it. And Andrew? Eleanor closed her eyes. When I saw Graves the next morning, he said Andrew had run away. Samuel whispered. You believed him? No, Eleanor said. I obeyed him. That was worse. Edward saw Samuel understand that. Belief could be excused by youth. Obedience was a choice wearing a school blazer. Edward asked, Where is the key now? Eleanor opened her eyes. Gone. Gone? I threw it into the lake the next week. Daniel said you should have kept it. Daniel liked inventing pain where fact was sufficient. Edward watched her carefully. She was guilty of Andrew's death, morally, practically, historically. But was she guilty of Daniel's? Her confession came too easily in the old case and too cleanly in the new. People often confess to what could no longer be charged easily to hide what still could. Or they confessed to old guilt because murder had finally made silence impractical. He needed the method. How did Daniel die? Edward asked.
Eleanor looked at him. I don't know. What did he take before the speech? Nothing from me. Did he drink from the cup? Yes. Did you touch the cup? No. The wine? No. His speech pages? No. His medication? No. That answer was too quick. Edward leaned forward. Daniel took medication? Eleanor stopped. Ashcroft looked up. Edward repeated. Daniel took medication? I don't know. You do. Eleanor looked away for the first time. He had a heart condition, she said. Samuel stared. Since when? Years. Quietly managed. Daniel did not like vulnerabilities that could not be turned into speeches. What medication? I don't know exactly. Beta blocker, antiarrhythmic, something he kept in a small silver pill case. Where? Inside his jacket. Edward turned to Ashcroft. Was a pill case recovered? Ashcroft checked her phone, then called an officer. A minute later, she said, no pill case listed among personal effects. Edward looked back at Eleanor. Who knew? Marcus, Thomas, me, perhaps Clara. Daniel told people when it benefited him. Samuel said so he could have been poisoned through pills. Edward shook his head. Could, but his last word was key. Eleanor said quietly, because Daniel enjoyed dying as he lived.
Edward looked at her. Meaning? Making everyone else remember the worst possible thing. That sounded true. It also sounded like resentment polished by legal training. A knock came at the archive door. An officer entered holding a clear evidence bag. Inside lay a small silver case engraved with the Blackwood crest. Found under the radiator behind the stage curtain, the officer said. Ashcroft took it. Edward looked at Eleanor. For the first time, she looked surprised. Not much. Enough. Edward took the bag and examined the case. Old silver, school crest, scratched. The clasp bore a faint reddish smear. Not blood. Wine? Polish? Inside, visible through the plastic, were 3 tablets in a divided compartment. One slot empty. Daniel had taken a pill before the speech. Someone had thrown the case behind the curtain. Or Daniel dropped it, or the killer removed it and hid it badly. Edward looked at the room. Now, he said, we have tonight's key. Samuel frowned. That's not a key. No, Edward said. It opens Daniel. He turned to Ashcroft. Find Marcus Reed and Thomas Bell, and Clara Finch. Which first? Edward looked at the pill case, then at Eleanor, then at Samuel. Clara. Samuel stiffened. Why Clara? Because Daniel wrote, CF, dangerous. I dislike dead men being right by accident.
Chapter 3. The Old Class. Clara Finch had chosen the art room, which was either coincidence or taste, and Edward Hale disliked trusting either at a murder scene. The room smelled of turpentine, dust, paper, and expensive neglect. Student charcoal studies leaned against one wall. Half-finished still lifes sat on easels, all apples, bottles, skulls, and other objects teenagers were told to observe before they began observing one another. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Under the fluorescent lights, Clara looked less like an alumni guest and more like someone who had returned to inspect a crime scene she had been forced to leave unfinished 25 years earlier. She sat on the edge of a table, arms folded, black dress damp at the hem, eyes bright with anger and exhaustion. Edward entered with Ashcroft and Samuel Price, who had insisted on coming until Ashcroft told him no and Edward told him yes, mostly because Clara's reaction to him would be worth more than her first answers. Clara saw Samuel and looked away too quickly. Bad start, Edward said. Clara looked back at him. For whom? For anyone hoping you didn't care. She gave a short laugh. I cared when Andrew was alive. That put me ahead of most of the room. Samuel's face tightened, but he said nothing. Good. He was learning. Slowly, but grief often did badly in classrooms. Edward leaned against a paint-spattered workbench. Daniel wrote CF dangerous. Why? Because Daniel finally said something accurate. That's refreshing. Continue. Clara rubbed one hand over her mouth, then dropped it. I was writing about Blackwood. For publication? Yes. About Andrew? About scholarships, abuse, old boys, bought silence, vanished records. Andrew was the center, but not the only story. Schools like this don't rot in one room. Ashcroft said, Did Daniel know? Yes. How? He knew everything, eventually, not because he was clever, because people like Daniel collect shame the way other men collect watches. Did he threaten you? Clara smiled without warmth. I offered me an exclusive. Edward watched Samuel. The brother's eyes hardened. What kind of exclusive? Edward asked. The kind where he became a brave public figure exposing the school's past, while quietly selling everyone else's guilt back to them first. He wanted me to write it around him, Daniel Cross, survivor of a toxic institution, finally breaking the silence. Very moving, very false. Did you refuse? I told him if he wanted absolution, he should try religion, because journalism had standards. Bold claim. I said standards, not miracles. Edward almost smiled. Clara Finch was angry, but not stupid. Dangerous, yes. Daniel's note had been fair. Dangerous did not mean killer. It meant she might tell the truth in a room where truth had been declared antisocial. Ashcroft opened her notebook. Did you know Daniel's heart condition? Clara's face changed. Not surprise, confirmation. Yes. How? I knew, he told me. When? Years ago, after a televised debate. I was covering it. He disappeared into a side corridor, pale as chalk, one hand on his chest. I found him. He told me to keep my mouth shut.
I said I usually charged men more politely before doing favors. What medication did he take? I don't know. Small white tablets, silver case, Blackwood crest. He was sentimental when it made him look aristocratic. Did you touch the case tonight?
No. Did you see him take a pill? Clara paused. There. Not guilt necessarily, memory choosing whether to become inconvenient. When? Edward asked. Before the speech, behind the stage curtain, he took the case from his jacket. Alone? No. Who was with him? Thomas Bell. Samuel muttered. Of course. Edward looked at him. Personal dislike or evidence? Both, probably, Samuel said. Clara said, Thomas was joking at first, then Daniel showed him something on his phone. Thomas stopped laughing. What did he show him? I couldn't see. Did Thomas touch the pill case? Another pause. Yes. Ashcroft's pen moved. Clara continued, Daniel offered him one like it was a sweet. Thomas said something like, I'm anxious, not suicidal. Daniel laughed. Then he took one himself. Did Thomas touch the case before or after Daniel took the pill? Before. Daniel tossed it to him. Thomas caught it, looked at it, tossed it back. Edward turned slightly toward Ashcroft. The case was found behind the stage radiator. Yes, she said. Thomas had handling access. Yes. Clara said, Thomas didn't kill him. No. No. Thomas is a coward, not a planner. Cowards plan beautifully when cornered. Not Thomas. He leaks, he doesn't stab. Poison, Ashcroft corrected. Clara looked at her. Fine, he doesn't poison. He sweats near exits and calls it trauma. Edward accepted that as character evidence, which meant not enough, but not useless. What did Daniel have on Thomas? Clara's expression soured. Old recording. Of what? The initiation. Not Andrew's death, earlier that night. Thomas laughing, Marcus dragging Andrew by the blazer, Daniel doing his little king routine, Eleanor standing there with the key, me shouting at them to stop. Samuel's head snapped toward her. You were there? Clara closed her eyes once. At first. At first? She followed them after chapel study. I saw them take Andrew down toward the lower corridor. I tried to stop it. Marcus shoved me into the wall. Daniel told me scholarship girls should be careful where they spend their courage. Thomas laughed because Thomas always laughed when Daniel gave him permission. Eleanor told me to go back upstairs. And you did? Samuel said. The sentence was quiet, worse than shouting. Clara looked at him. Yes. Samuel nodded once, as if his body needed a movement to survive the answer. Edward said, Why no statement from you in the file? Because I went to Graves the next morning, told him Andrew hadn't run away, told him about the corridor. He said I was confused, emotional, socially resentful, and lucky my scholarship review was due after Christmas. Threatened you? Yes. Did you stay silent? Yes. For 25 years? Clara's voice sharpened. No, I wrote letters. I called Andrew's mother once and hung up because I was 17 and disgusting. I tried telling a local reporter when I was 19. Nothing happened. Then life happened, and cowardice matured into research. Samuel looked away. That answer had not forgiven her. It had made hatred harder, which was often more useful. Edward asked, Did Daniel know you had the old recording? Clara nodded. Yes. Where is it? I don't have it. Who does? Daniel did. On his phone? I think so. Or cloud storage. He liked making people believe he carried evidence in his pocket. Ashcroft made a note to secure the phone again.
Edward said Daniel planned to use the recording in Ledger tonight. Yes. To blackmail Eleanor? Eleanor, Marcus, Thomas, maybe Graves if dying old men still pay in useful currency. And you? Clara smiled tiredly. Daniel didn't blackmail journalists. He offered them access and expected vanity to do the rest. Samuel spoke, voice low. Did you want him dead? Clara looked at him. Yes. The room held. But I wanted him alive enough to talk, she said. That's the difference between revenge and reporting. Reporting has worse timing. Edward moved toward the door. Where is Thomas? Ashcroft checked her phone. Drama studio, because apparently he requested somewhere with better air. Good. Comedians like stages. Clara got off the table. I'm coming. No. Ashcroft said. Edward said, yes. Ashcroft glared at him. He shrugged. May Thomas perform better with an audience he fears? Clara said, he fears everyone. Then we'll give him variety. The drama studio had once been the old gymnasium and still carried the smell of varnished floorboards, dust curtains, and adolescent humiliation. Black curtains hung along one wall. A row of plastic chairs faced a small practice stage. Thomas Bell sat in the third chair from the aisle, knees bouncing, hands clasped, face wet with sweat. Without cameras, makeup, and audience warmth, he looked smaller than his voice had promised. He saw Clara and winced. Oh, good. The reunion continues. Edward sat in the chair directly in front of him and turned it around backward. You handled Daniel's pill case. Thomas blinked. Straight to that? No warm-up? No, how are you coping, Tom? How are you coping, Tom? Badly. Useful. Pill case. Thomas swallowed. He tossed it to me. I tossed it back. Why? Because Daniel was Daniel. He liked props. What did he show you on his phone? Thomas looked at Clara. Don't, she said. He looked at Samuel. Samuel said nothing. Thomas rubbed his face. A video. From 1998? Yes. The initiation? Yes. Who was in it? Everyone who matters. Meaning everyone here? Not Samuel, obviously. Do not become clever. It will confuse your brand. Thomas almost laughed, then remembered the room. Daniel said he was tired of carrying the class alone, said Blackwood owed him, said Eleanor had done very well from a justice system she'd beaten before she had breasts. Ashcroft's eyebrows rose. Thomas added quickly, his words. Did he threaten you? He said I'd built a career laughing at cruelty and that the public might enjoy the pilot episode. Accurate? Thomas stared at the floor. Yes. Did you switch his pills? No. Could you have? He looked up sharply. No. Wrong. You caught the case, opened it, saw the pills, returned it. You could have switched one if you had a tablet ready. I didn't. Why should I believe you? Thomas's face twisted. Because if I wanted Daniel dead, I'd have done it years ago and made it look like choking on his own applause. Clara said, too well written for you. Thomas pointed at Clara. See, this is why nobody liked journalists even before they were journalists. Edward leaned forward. When you opened the case, how many pills were inside? Thomas stopped. Good.
Think, Edward said, not creatively, accurately. 4, Thomas said. Ashcroft looked up. There were 3 when recovered, 1 slot empty. Then Daniel took one. Yes. Were all 4 identical? Thomas hesitated. No. There it was. How many different? 1 looked different, slightly yellow. Daniel said new prescription. I said it looked like horse aspirin. He said I looked like a man who needed medication more than he did. Which pill did Daniel take? The yellow one. Ashcroft wrote quickly. Edward asked, was the yellow pill still there when you tossed it back? Yes. Did Daniel remove it after? Yes. Did anyone else touch the case after you? Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. Thomas? Marcus. Where? Behind stage. Daniel called him over. I left, but I saw Marcus take the case from Daniel. They were arguing. About what? Money, or the video, or both. Marcus said, you promised me I was out. Daniel said, nobody is out, Marcus. That's the whole point of school. Clara whispered, bastard. Edward stood. Where is Marcus? Ashcroft checked. Old weights room. He asked for space. Men like Marcus always do. The old weights room sat under the east wing, near the changing rooms and the corridor leading toward the chapel stairs. It had been modernized into a fitness suite for current pupils, but one corner still displayed old rugby photographs and cracked wooden shields. Marcus Reed stood by a window, arms folded, massive shoulders tight under his suit. He looked like a man who could move furniture and had spent his life hoping nobody asked what else he had moved. When he saw Clara, his face hardened. When he saw Samuel, it broke slightly. No, Marcus said. Edward stopped. No what? I didn't kill Daniel. That saves time. Did you switch his pill? No. Did you handle the case? Marcus looked at Ashcroft, then at Edward. Yes. Why? Daniel gave it to me. Why? He wanted me to see the video on his phone first. Then he tossed me the case and said, hold that, my heart's acting like yours did when Price started coughing. Samuel moved before anyone expected it. He shoved Marcus hard in the chest. Marcus barely moved,
but the sound cracked across the room. Ashcroft grabbed Samuel's arm. "Enough," she said. Samuel breathed hard but stopped. Marcus did not defend himself. That mattered. Edward asked, "Andrew was coughing?" Marcus nodded once. "You heard him?" "Yes." "Through the door?" "Yes." "Did you try to open it?" Marcus's face clenched. "Yes." "Who had the key?" "Eleanor." "Where was she?" "Gone to get Graves. Daniel told me to stop panicking. Thomas was crying. Clara had run. Andrew was banging on the door." Marcus swallowed. Then he wasn't. Samuel looked as if he had been hit by something too large to answer. Edward said, "Tonight, pill case." Marcus nodded again. "Daniel handed it to me. I opened it, saw the pills, didn't touch them. Thomas says one was yellow." "Yes." "Did you notice?" "Yes." "Did Daniel take the yellow one after?" "No."
Edward's eyes sharpened. "No? No," Marcus said. "That's why I've been trying to tell the officer. Daniel took a white one. He picked up the yellow one first, looked at it, laughed and put it back, then took a white pill. Thomas had lied or misremembered, or Marcus had. Better, one of them had a reason for the color. Ashcroft said the recovered case contains 3 pills, 2 white, 1 yellow, empty slot. Edward looked at Marcus. Then the missing pill was white. Yes. Was the yellow pill dangerous? How would I know? You looked relieved when he put it back. Marcus stared at him. There. Edward stepped closer. What was the yellow pill? Marcus said nothing. Marcus. The big man looked towards Samuel, then Clara, then the old rugby photographs. Not poison, he said. What? Not poison. It was what Daniel used when he wanted to stay sharp. Some stimulant, not prescribed. He'd use it for speeches, interviews, late votes. Bad for his heart, probably. I told him once he was an idiot. Could it kill him? Maybe. I don't know. Who knew he carried it? Thomas, me, Eleanor, maybe Clara. Half of Westminster, probably. Edward walked to the window. Rain blurred the glass. Daniel had a heart condition. Daniel carried legitimate medication and illicit stimulant. Thomas said he took yellow. Marcus said he took white. Case hidden behind radiator. Death rapid after toast. Last word key. Too many symbolic roads, not enough chemistry. He turned. Did Daniel drink from the cup after taking the white pill? Marcus nodded. How long between pill and toast? 5 minutes, maybe 6. Who poured the wine into the cup? Catering. But Daniel added something. Ashcroft looked up sharply. What? Marcus's face tightened. Drops from a small bottle. He said the wine tasted like school chapel varnish and he had bitters. Edward stared. What small bottle? I don't know. Where did it go? He put it in his jacket. Ashcroft checked the personal effects again. No small bottle recovered. Edward looked at Clara. You saw this? She shook her head. Thomas said, I saw him with something, thought it was breath drops. Edward closed his eyes for half a second, not in frustration, in order. Daniel had medicated himself, possibly added drops to wine, then died. A killer could switch the drops, or Daniel poisoned himself accidentally. But last word key still tied death to Andrew. Unless Daniel knew during death that the mechanism was not current poison, but old key because he saw the person who had tampered, or because the substance tasted like something from the old night. Search backstage, Hurton's, radiator, lectern base, rubbish bins, Daniel's coat route. Find the bottle. Ashcroft gave the order. Samuel spoke quietly. Are we losing Andrew? Edward looked at him. No. It feels like we are losing him. No, we are finding Daniel first. Andrew is why Daniel died, but Daniel's body does not care about symbolism. It cares about chemistry. 10 minutes later, an officer returned with a tiny amber glass bottle in an evidence bag. It had been found inside a flower arrangement behind the stage. The label had been peeled off. The dropper cap was black. A faint smell came through even the sealed bag when opened for testing. Bitter, herbal, medicinal. Ashcroft looked at Edward. Bitters? No, Edward said. Someone wanted a man with a weak heart and a stimulant habit to add death to his own toast. Who gave it to him? Edward looked at the old class. Clara, Thomas, Marcus, Samuel in the doorway, Eleanor absent upstairs under watch, Graves still waiting like a dying file cabinet. Someone who knew Daniel trusted his own bad habits more than other people's drinks. The tablet in Ashcroft's hand buzzed. She checked the message. Forensics opened the cup base, she said. And? They found something inside. What? A key. The room went silent. Samuel whispered, No. Edward turned toward the door. Now the case had stopped pretending to be only tonight's murder.
Bring the cup and bring Eleanor back.
Chapter 4. The Key. The key inside the silver cup was small, blackened with age, and more useful than everyone in Blackwood Hall wanted it to be. It lay in an evidence tray on the archive table under a white lamp, ugly and ordinary after 25 years of becoming myth. No gold, no ceremonial ribbon, no Latin motto, just an iron key with a narrow shaft, a worn bit, and a tiny stamped number near the bow. LC3, Lower Chapel, Door 3. The kind of key a school could misplace in a report, but not in a lock. Edward Hale stood over it while rain worried the high basement windows and the old archive hummed around him with the miserable patience of stored paper. Eleanor Vane sat at the end of the table, hands folded, face controlled enough to be considered hostile. Marcus Reed stood near the shelves, shoulders hunched, looking at the key as if it had crawled out of his own throat. Thomas Bell sat on a box marked House Theater Records, which seemed unfair to theater. Clara Finch leaned against a filing cabinet, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the key. Samuel Price stood closest and did not touch anything. That took more discipline than most people in the room deserved. Ashcroft placed the opened silver cup base beside the key. The cup had been hollow, not by accident or later alteration, but by design, a ceremonial object with a hidden threaded base, probably meant once for repair weights or a maker's plug. Daniel Cross used it as a coffin small enough for a secret and large enough for spectacle. "Who put it there?" Ashcroft asked. "Daniel," Edward said. Eleanor looked up. "You sound certain." "I am certain enough to irritate you." "That is not a standard of proof." "No, it is often a useful beginning." He pointed to the cup base. "The interior thread has fresh scratches. Daniel had the cup handled privately this afternoon under donor privilege. Dr. Ellery confirmed it. The school steward polished it afterward but did not open the base. Daniel knew the cup would be on stage. He knew he would lift it. He knew if anything happened tonight, the cup would be examined." Thomas let out a weak laugh. "Anything? That's generous. Daniel planned a murder investigation around himself?" "No, Daniel planned blackmail around a school tradition and accidentally became evidence." Clara said he wanted the key found after the speech. "Possibly during it," Edward said. "He wrote, 'Tell them tonight' on the speech. He put the key in the cup. He had the ledger copy. He had the old recording. He intended to make everyone understand that Blackwood's fellowship had a locked door at the bottom of it." Samuel's voice was quiet. Ansel silence. "Yes." Samuel nodded once. It cost him, but he nodded. He would. Eleanor looked at the key again, and for 1 second the judge disappeared. In her place sat a 17-year-old prefect in a corridor listening to a boy cough behind a locked door, while the future waited upstairs, clean and expensive. Then the judge returned. "That key should have been in the lake," she said. "Clearly the lake disappointed you," Edward replied. Marcus swallowed. "I thought you threw it." "I did," Eleanor said. Thomas looked at her. "Then how did Daniel get it?" Eleanor did not answer. Edward turned to Dr. Ellery, who had been standing near the door with the posture of institutional damage control and the face of someone finally realizing the institution might be damaged. "Where was the cup stored?" "In the West Trophy Cabinet." "Before tonight?" "Yes." "And the key?" "I have never seen it." "No, because you were not meant to. Mr. Graves was." Everyone looked toward the corridor. Headmaster Alastair Graves had not been moved downstairs. His health made stairs theatrically impractical and medically annoying, but he had been wheeled into the chapel vestry above, under watch. Edward had not questioned him yet. Old men who had spent decades preserving lies did not vanish if one made them wait. They fermented. Ashcroft said Graves had the key after the old incident. "Yes," Edward said. "Eleanor returned the ledger key at 00:15. Graves witnessed it. He told the children Andrew had run away. The physical key used that night did not vanish into a lake. Eleanor may have thrown something into the lake, or she may remember what she needed to survive, but Graves kept the real key." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because men like Graves keep proof as insurance against children becoming adults." Clara looked sick. "Daniel found it. Or Graves gave it to him." That moved the room. Eleanor said, "Why would Graves give Daniel the key?" Edward picked up Daniel's copied note in its sleeve and read aloud. "Edward Vicey pays. Mr. Merrill pays less. Thomas Benet talks. Clara Fairfax dangerous. Samuel Plink useful.
Headmaster Graves, dying. Thomas said, "That last bit was charming." Daniel knew Graves was dying. A dying man with a secret can become sentimental, reckless, or scared of being buried without control. Daniel visited him last month, according to Dr. Ellery's guest log, twice. Dr. Ellery looked as if she wanted to object and could not afford the stupidity. Samuel said, "So Daniel got the key from Graves?" "Yes, then used it tonight." Ashcroft looked at the amber bottle in the evidence bag, and someone used Daniel's habits. Edward nodded. Daniel had a heart condition. He carried prescribed medication. He also used stimulant drops before speeches. Marcus saw him add drops to the cup. The bottle was recovered in the flowers. If the drops were replaced or contaminated, Daniel made himself the delivery system. Clara said, "Who knew about the drops?" "Marcus, Thomas, maybe Eleanor, maybe half of Westminster, according to Marcus. That is less helpful than it sounds." Thomas raised a hand weakly. "For the record, I didn't know the bottle was dangerous. I thought he used that stuff because he was vain and chemically optimistic." Marcus said, "He used it before major speeches. 2 drops, sometimes 3, said it sharpened him." "And tonight?" Edward asked. Marcus looked down. "More. He squeezed it hard. Maybe nervous, maybe showing off. After taking a white pill," Ashcroft said. "Yes." Edward walked to the table and looked at the pill case. 3 pills remained, 2 white, 1 yellow stimulant tablet. The missing pill was likely prescribed. Daniel had taken the safe medication, then added contaminated drops to wine. A killer did not need to touch the cup, the wine, or the stage. Only the drop bottle before Daniel used it. Better than poison in the cup, more personal, more dependent on Daniel's vanity. "Where did Daniel keep the bottle?" Marcus said. "Jacket pocket."
Thomas said, "Sometimes in the pill case." Clara said, "He had it in his hand behind the curtain." Eleanor said nothing. Edward looked at her. "Lady Vane?" She met his eyes. "No. I haven't asked. You were about to ask whether I touched the bottle. Did you?" "No." "Did you know he used it?" "Yes." "From where?" "Daniel told me years ago, during a dinner after he first entered Parliament. He said public life rewarded men who could look calm while their hearts tried to escape." "Did you know it was in his jacket tonight?" "No." "Did you see him use it?" "No." "Did you see the bottle at all?" A pause. "Tiny. There." "No." Edward did not move. That answer had a door in it. Eleanor's face tightened. Samuel looked at her. Ashcroft said, "Lady Vane?" Eleanor exhaled through her nose. "I saw a small bottle on the lectern before the speech. I assumed it was his." "When?" "After I spoke to him, before the hall was called to order." "Did you touch it?" "No." "Who did?" "I saw Thomas near it." Thomas sprang up. "Oh, come on." Clara said, "Sit down, Thomas." "No, absolutely not. I am not being murdered by implication. I was near the lectern because Daniel told me to check the microphone. He said the school's sound system had the reliability of a Victorian lung." Edward looked at him. "Did you touch the bottle?" "No." "Did you see it?" "Yes. Amber bottle, no label." I said, "Still using your little courage drops?" He said, "Still using jokes to avoid prison?" That was our friendship. Marcus rubbed his face. "Jesus." Edward turned to Clara. "You?" "I saw it after Thomas left. Daniel put it back in his pocket." "Which pocket?" "Inside left." "Who had access to his jacket?" "Anyone close enough to hug him," Clara said, "so half the old class and several donors hoping proximity was tax-deductible."
Edward stood still for a moment, letting the room settle into sequence. Daniel arrived with pill case and drops. He had key hidden in cup base. He intended public leverage. He spoke to Eleanor. He showed phone to Thomas. He handled pill case. He argued with Marcus. He added drops to cup. He died. The killer needed opportunity to contaminate or replace drops before Daniel used them. The obvious killer was Eleanor. The emotional killer was Samuel. The angry truth-teller was Clara. The physical bully was Marcus. The cowardly witness was Thomas. The dying institution was Graves. The key sat between them all like an old tooth. Edward said, "We need Graves." The chapel vestry was warm, dim, and smelled of wax, old hymnals, and expensive gilt.
Headmaster Alistair Graves sat in his wheelchair beside a narrow table, school scarf over his knees, oxygen tube under his nose, skin thin as folded paper. His eyes, however, were lively. That was the cruelty of age in certain men. The body failed before the talent for evasion. Edward entered with Ashcroft, Samuel, and Eleanor. He left the others outside. Graves looked first at Eleanor, then Samuel, then Edward, not at Ashcroft. Old headmasters ranked authority by instinct and often got it wrong. "Mr. Hale," Graves said, "I am told you are troubling my school." "No," Edward said. "Your school was troubled before I arrived. I'm adding ventilation." Graves smiled faintly. "Ah, wit, the refuge of men with insufficient reverence. Reverence is what schools demand when records are missing." Samuel stepped forward. "Where is my brother?" The room lost its small performance. Graves looked at him for a long time. "You have his eyes." Samuel's voice shook. "Do not spend my brother like a sentence." Edward almost approved aloud. He did not. Graves looked away first. Andrew Price was a difficult boy. Samuel moved, but Ashcroft stopped him with one hand. Edward leaned closer. Andrew Price was an asthmatic child, locked behind door LC3, while your prefect held the key and your head boy learned the taste of power. Eleanor flinched. Graves did not. "Children are cruel," Graves said. "Institutions must manage aftermath." "There it is," Edward said, "the Blackwood curriculum in one sentence." Graves breathed shallowly. "I did what was necessary." "You found Andrew dead?" Graves closed his eyes. "Yes." Samuel made a sound that was not quite speech. "Where?" Edward asked. "The lower archive room." "What did you do with the body?" Graves opened his eyes. "Protected the school." Samuel lunged this time. Ashcroft and Edward both caught him. Eleanor stood frozen, white as chalk. "Where?" Samuel shouted. "Where did you put him?"
Graves looked tired now, or pretending to be tired. It no longer mattered. Old boiler flue beneath the chapel crypt, sealed during renovations in 2001. Samuel stopped fighting. That was worse. Rage had kept him upright. Now information did. Ashcroft spoke into a radio, voice flat and hard. Orders went out immediately. Edward asked, "Why keep the key?" Graves gave a thin smile. "Because guilt matures poorly in children. They grow, prosper, become ambitious, then suddenly discover conscience at inconvenient intervals. The key reminded them that memory could be managed." "You gave it to Daniel?" "Yes." "Why?" Graves looked toward Eleanor. "Because Daniel came to me and asked whether I wanted Blackwood's final story told by Samuel Price or by someone who understood loyalty." Eleanor said, "Daniel understood nothing but appetite." Graves smiled. "He understood leverage. That is a form of education." Edward asked, "Did you know he planned to blackmail them?" "I knew he planned to control the confession." "Did you give him the amber bottle?" For the first time, Graves looked genuinely confused. "No." "Good. Did you know he used stimulant drops?" "Yes. Daniel was always weak in ways he despised." "Who else knew?" "Eleanor, Marcus, Thomas, probably Clara. I knew because he used them before the governor's dinner last spring." "Where were the drops kept tonight?" "I did not know." Edward watched him. "Truth, likely. Graves was Andrew's burial, Daniel's key source, institutional evil in a scarf. But not tonight's poison. Too stationary, too theatrical in older ways." Samuel's voice came cold now. "You let my mother die without knowing." Graves looked at him. "Your mother received compensation." The punch came from Eleanor. No one expected it. Not Samuel, not Ashcroft, not Edward. Eleanor Vane stepped forward and slapped Alistair Graves hard across the face. The sound cracked through the vestry. Graves' head turned. His oxygen tube shifted. For 1 second, he looked less like a headmaster than an old man hit by a truth he had spent years grading. Ashcroft said, "Lady Vane?" Eleanor was breathing hard. "Compensation," she said. "You buried a boy and called it compensation." Edward looked at her. There was real horror there. Late, insufficient, legally complicated horror, but real. It
It did not clear her, it changed her. A radio call came through Ashcroft's shoulder. She listened, face tightening. They found the flue, sealed access, ground-penetrating team requested, possible remains. Samuel sat down on the vestry bench as if his bones had been cut. Edward turned back to Graves. One more question. Did Daniel tell you who he feared tonight? Graves rubbed his cheek slowly. The slap had reddened the skin. He did not fear anyone. Wrong. Graves smiled again, smaller. He said Eleanor had the most to lose, Marcus had the least courage, Thomas had the loosest mouth, Clara had the best timing, Samuel had the cleanest motive. And
he said the only person who might actually kill him would be the one who could still claim virtue afterward. Edward went still. Eleanor looked up. Graves looked at her, too, but Edward did not. He looked toward the chapel door, beyond which Clara Finch was waiting. A journalist, dangerous, truth-teller, victim, the one who could kill Daniel and call it justice if the story survived him. But had she touched the bottle? She had been near him. She knew his habits. She wanted him alive long enough to talk, or said so. No, too easy. The one who could claim virtue. Not Clara. A judge could claim law. A headmaster could claim institution. A brother could claim justice. But virtue, Blackwood's favorite word for cowardice with a scholarship. Edward turned. Where is Dr. Ellery? Ashcroft frowned. The headmistress? He said she had access to the cup, the stage, the donor room, Daniel's jacket during reception storage, and every school object. She also had the most to lose if Daniel turned tonight into a murder, but Daniel's speech would have turned it into institutional burial, missing child, old cover-up, current headmistress presiding over a donor-funded celebration built over a corpse, Eleanor said. Margaret Ellery was not here in 1998. No, Edward said, which means she can claim virtue without old guilt. Ashcroft was already moving. They found Dr. Ellery in her office, shredding paper. Not dramatically, that would have been vulgar. She stood beside a modern shredder feeding sheets into it with administrative despair and a speed that suggested practice. When Ashcroft opened the door, Ellery froze with one page in her hand. Edward looked at the desk. On it lay Daniel's event schedule, donor seating, a list of scholarship campaign pledges, and a small cardboard box labeled D. Cross, holding room items. Inside, a cufflink case, spare speech cards, a Blackwood tie pen, and an empty space shaped exactly like a small amber bottle. Ashcroft said, "Step away from the shredder." Ellery's face collapsed, not into guilt, into exhaustion. Edward looked at the shredded strips in the bin. Scholarship fund? Ellery said nothing. He turned tonight's event into a murder, but Daniel's speech would have turned it into institutional burial, missing child, old cover-up, current headmistress presiding, over a donor-funded celebration built over a corpse. I was not here, she said. No, Edward said, which means you can claim virtue without old guilt. Ashcroft removed the box from the desk. You took the amber bottle from Daniel's holding room items. Ellery whispered, he asked for his jacket before the speech. The bottle was in the pocket. I knew what it was. How? He used it before donor meetings. I warned him it was unsafe. He laughed. You altered it. I thought. She stopped. Edward's voice hardened. No. Ellery looked at him. Do not begin with, I thought. You are holding shredded evidence next to an empty box. Her face tightened. I added stimulant concentrate, not poison. I thought I would make him ill, force him off stage, stop the speech. He had already threatened to destroy us. He said if the school did not meet his terms, he would give them Andrew Price tonight. I only needed him unable to speak. And with his heart condition? I didn't know how severe. Stop. She did. Good. Edward stepped closer. You used his own drops because if he became ill, it would look like Daniel's private weakness, not the cup, not the school, not you. Ellery's eyes filled. I was protecting Blackwood. Ashcroft said, a boy died under your chapel. Another man died on your stage. I wasn't here when Andrew, but you were here when Daniel, Edward said. Silence. The shredder hummed once, then clicked off. Edward looked at the Latin motto visible through the office window across the hall, through silence towards light. Blackwood teaches fast, he said. Dr. Ellery sat down slowly, and for the first time all night, no one in the room tried to defend the school.
Chapter 5. The Headmistress. Dr. Margaret Ellery did not look like a murderer, which was usually how respectable murder entered rooms, not with blood on its sleeves, but with a lanyard, a donor list, and a sentence beginning, "I was only trying to protect." Her office overlooked the inner courtyard, where rain struck the old flagstones and ran in dark lines toward the drains. On the wall behind her desk hung photographs of Blackwood boys and girls standing with ministers, scientists, judges, bishops, athletes, CEOs, and one grinning astronaut who probably learned early how to hold his breath. Beneath the photographs sat the modern shredder, still warm, its bin half full of narrow paper strips. Ashcroft had already turned it off and bagged the contents. The cardboard box marked D. Cross, holding room items, sat on the desk. The empty space inside it seemed louder than the headmistress's breathing. Edward Hale stood by the window, looking not at her but at the reflection of the Latin motto across the hall, Per silentium ad lucem. Through silence toward light. The school had made that phrase look noble for a century. Tonight, it looked like instructions for obstruction. Dr. Ellery sat in her chair with her hands flat on the desk. "I did not intend to kill Daniel Cross." Edward turned. "That is almost never the defense people think it is." Ashcroft stood near the door. Samuel Price was outside with Clara Finch and a uniformed officer. Eleanor Vane had been moved to the archive room under watch. Marcus and Thomas were being held separately, which Edward considered a mercy to everyone's remaining intelligence. Dr. Ellery swallowed. "I wanted him stopped. Yes, he was going to destroy the school. No, he was going to expose what the school destroyed." Her face tightened. Administrative people hated distinctions that could not be solved by policy language. She said he was threatening us. He demanded a private arrangement, money for silence, influence over the scholarship fund, a public role in the new foundation. He said if we refused, he would turn tonight into a graveyard. That was unusually accurate of him. "You don't understand what this institution does." Edward looked at the wall of successful alumni. "I understand perfectly. It manufactures people who later insist their childhood cruelty was leadership training. That is cynical. It is also visible from the corridor." She looked down. "I found the amber bottle in his holding room box. I knew what it was. He had used it before speeches. Stimulant drops. Dangerous, yes, but his choice. I added concentrate from the medical cabinet. Caffeine compound, not poison. I thought he would become dizzy, unwell, unable to speak. The evening would pause. We would remove him from the stage, buy time. With Daniel's heart condition, I didn't know how fragile he was. You knew enough to use the bottle and not the wine." She said nothing. "That was the clever part," Edward continued. "Poison the cup and the school becomes the crime scene. Touch the wine and catering becomes part of it. Alter Daniel's own stimulant drops and his collapse becomes his weakness. Private vice, public tragedy. Blackwood survives as sympathetic host." Dr. Ellery's eyes filled, but tears from institutional people often arrived after strategy failed. Edward did not automatically respect them. "I have given my life to this school. No, you gave Daniel Cross enough stimulant to stop his speech and got a corpse instead. Let's not upgrade the biography yet." Ashcroft stepped forward. "Dr. Ellery, you'll need to come with us." The headmistress looked at her. "There are pupils here, not in this office. There are governors. They can wait. There are parents who will need. They can also wait." Edward looked at the shredded strips in the evidence bag. "What were you shredding?" Dr. Ellery closed her eyes.
Daniel's email. Threat? Yes. Printed? Yes. Why print it if you plan to destroy it? I didn't plan this. She opened her eyes. Not like that. No. You improvised badly. That's why Daniel died on stage instead of becoming ill backstage. Improvisation is where respectable people reveal their real curriculum. Ashcroft signaled to the officer outside. The officer stepped in. Before they led Dr. Ellery out, Samuel Price appeared in the doorway. He had clearly not waited because waiting had become obscene. Clara stood behind him, face hard. Dr. Ellery looked at Samuel, and for the first time she seemed afraid not of prison, but of being seen correctly. "You knew about Andrew," Samuel said. "I knew the story." "No, you knew the lie. I inherited records. You inherited a body under the chapel crypt." Her mouth trembled. "I didn't know where he was. But you knew enough to stop Daniel from saying his name." Silence. That was the true indictment. Not legal, worse.
Samuel stepped aside as the officer took Ellery by the arm. She stood slowly, and the headmistress of Blackwood Hall became suddenly smaller than the office built around her. As she passed him, Samuel said nothing more. That was good. Some people did not deserve the relief of being shouted at. The door closed behind her, and the school seemed to exhale through old wood and heating pipes. They found Andrew Price before dawn. Not fully, not cleanly, not in any way that belonged in speeches. The sealed boiler flue beneath the chapel crypt had been opened by a specialist team, while rain hammered the stone above, and the old chapel bell hung silent in the tower. There were remains: a school blazer fragment, a corroded inhaler, a metal button from a Blackwood uniform, enough for identity to stop being a hope and become procedure. Samuel stood in the chapel aisle when Ashcroft told him. Clara was beside him. Eleanor Vane stood at the rear pew, pale, silent, uninvited, but not removed. Marcus Reed had asked to be brought in and then found he could not enter. Thomas Bell sat on the chapel steps outside and cried into his hands with the exhausted shame of a man who had finally discovered jokes had no jurisdiction underground. Headmaster Graves, when informed, closed his eyes and said nothing. Edward considered that his finest statement of the night. Samuel did not collapse. He nodded once. Then he said, "My mother died waiting." No one answered, because there was no answer that did not make the room worse. Eleanor stepped forward. "Samuel," she turned to him. She stopped. Whatever apology she had carried across the chapel died before reaching him. Good. It was 25 years late and underfed. "I locked the door," she said. "Yes," Samuel said. "I went back. Yes. I should have opened it. Yes." The words were not shouted. That made them brutal. Eleanor's face folded, not completely, but enough to show the 17-year-old beneath the judge. "I am sorry," she said. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. "Be sorry in court." Then he walked away. Edward watched Eleanor absorb that. For a woman who had spent her adult life in courtrooms, it was probably the only answer that could hurt properly. By 7, Blackwood Hall had begun composing its first statement. Edward saw the draft because Ashcroft showed it to him with the expression of someone offering spoiled food for inspection.
Blackwood Hall is devastated by the tragic events of the reunion evening and is cooperating fully with authorities regarding both the sudden death of Daniel Cross and newly discovered information relating to former pupil Andrew Price. Edward handed it back. "Newly discovered," he said. "Yes. The body was under their chapel. Yes. Devastated is doing gymnastic work. Statements usually do. Add buried and watch them faint." Ashcroft almost smiled. Across the corridor, Dr. Ellery was being taken through the side entrance. Eleanor Vane sat with counsel now, her face rebuilt into legal composure. Marcus Reed had given a full statement. Thomas Bell had given 3 statements and contradicted himself only twice, which for him seemed like growth. Clara Finch had already begun writing, though Edward suspected this time she would check every sentence until it bled. Samuel Price stood in the courtyard under the weakening rain, looking at the chapel tower. Edward joined him. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Samuel said, "Daniel said key. Yes. Not because he was sorry. No. Because even dying, he wanted the room to know he owned the secret. Yes." Samuel laughed once. It was a terrible sound. "And he still helped us find Andrew." "Yes. That feels disgusting." "It is. What do I do with that?" "Nothing yet." Samuel looked at him. "Nothing? People say closure when they want grief to become well-behaved. Don't help them." Samuel looked back at the chapel. "They'll make Andrew part of a lesson." "Yes. I hate that." "You should." "How do I stop it?" "Keep his name attached to what happened, not what the school wants it to mean." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Thank you." Edward said nothing. Thanks made him uncomfortable when the facts had done most of the work and 25 years had done none. The police cars left Blackwood Hall in gray morning light. Daniel Cross was dead because a headmistress had tried to silence a blackmailer without understanding the body she was tampering with. Andrew Price had been dead for 25 years because children had been cruel, adults had been cowardly, and a school had mistaken reputation for a living organism worth feeding. There was no single villain, which would annoy the public.
The public appetite preferred one face. The law would take Ellery for Daniel. It would take what it could from Eleanor, Marcus, Thomas, and Graves for Andrew, depending on age, evidence, obstruction, and the usual disappointing architecture of delayed justice. Clara would publish. Samuel would bury his brother properly. Blackwood would apologize in excellent prose and then begin raising money for reform.
Edward walked once more through the great hall before leaving. The stage had been cleared. The silver cup was gone. The wine stain remained faintly in the boards. The old class photograph had been removed for evidence, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall. Above it, the motto still gleamed, Per silentium ad lucem, through silence toward light. Edward looked at it for a moment, then said to the empty hall, no. Silence had not led to light. Silence had led to a locked door, a hidden body, a dead blackmailer, and a headmistress with a shredder. The light had come from a ledger, a key, a brother who refused to stop looking, and a dying man too rotten to understand that evidence does not care why it is revealed. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Edward stepped into the courtyard. Behind him, Blackwood Hall stood on its hill, old and wet and wounded at last. It would survive. Places like that usually did. Stone survived shame better than flesh. But now, beneath the chapel, the school had lost its favorite defense. It could no longer say Andrew Price had run away. The door had been locked. The key had been kept. And after 25 years, the silence had finally found the wrong throat.
Epilogue, the school motto. By noon, Blackwood Hall had discovered grief in committee form, which meant there were 6 people in the governor's room arguing over verbs while a dead boy's remains were being removed from beneath the chapel. Edward Hale had seen institutions panic before, but schools had a special gift for it. Corporations protected profit, governments protected power, families protected blood, schools protected reputation and called it children. The first official statement came out at 12:17 and used the phrase historical safeguarding failure to describe the fact that Andrew Price had been locked in a lower archive room, left to die, hidden in a boiler flue, and edited out of a class photograph by adults who had then continued teaching young people about honor. Ashcroft read the statement on her phone, looked at Edward, and said, "Historical safeguarding failure." Edward said, "That phrase should be arrested separately." She said, "I'll see what I can do." The police cordon still held the main drive. Reporters had gathered beyond the gates, their cameras aimed at the black stone facade and the chapel tower. Some of them had already discovered the old motto and were pronouncing Latin with the confidence of people who had not suffered enough consequences. Alumni were leaving in hired cars with tinted windows. The richer ones looked offended that tragedy had ignored seating plans. Thomas Bell tried to leave through the service path, was caught by a camera crew, and gave a 30-second statement about the burden of memory that would have been moving if he had not checked his reflection in the camera lens halfway through. Marcus Reed stayed longer than expected. He gave his statement, then sat alone in the old changing room corridor with his hands between his knees, looking at the floor where Andrew had once been dragged past him. Eleanor Vane did not leave at all. She sat in the headmistress's waiting room with her solicitor, her black dress severe, her face calm, her career beginning to collapse around the one locked door she had never managed to open. Dr. Margaret Ellery was charged first for Daniel Cross's death. The details would take time to harden in court because legal truth moves like an elderly horse when expensive schools are involved, but the mechanism was clear enough. Daniel carried his own stimulant drops. Ellery found the bottle in his holding room items, altered it with a concentrated compound from the school medical stores, and returned it. Her stated intention, once the first wall of denial cracked, was not murder but interruption. Make him ill, stop the speech, prevent him from naming Andrew Price and exposing Blackwood's old crime in front of donors, alumni, pupils, and cameras. She had counted on Daniel's vanity, his stimulant habit, and his desire to perform. She had not counted properly on his heart condition, his medication, the wine, the stress, and the fact that bodies did not care whether institutional panic preferred manslaughter to murder. Daniel added the drops himself. Daniel lifted the cup himself. Daniel drank. Daniel died. That did not make him innocent. It made him the final product of a school that had trained everyone around him to treat human beings as problems to be managed until the management became fatal. Ellery's office yielded Daniel's printed threat, shredded but recoverable, along with a copy of the old ledger and a donor campaign document titled Restoring Blackwood's Moral Legacy. Edward found that last title almost impressive in its indecency. Ashcroft said it made her want to bite a desk. Edward advised against it. School furniture carries disease, he said. Andrew Price's remains were taken from the chapel crypt just after 1 in the afternoon. There was no ceremony.
That came later when people had learned what tone to use. For now, there were forensic tents, specialists, sealed bags, quiet orders, and Samuel Price standing under the cloister roof with Clara Finch beside him. The corroded inhaler had been found near the remains. So had a torn piece of school tie and 2 buttons from Andrew's blazer. The lower archive room door, sealed during renovations and forgotten by everyone except the people who needed forgetting to continue, still bore deep scratch marks on the inside face, low enough for a 15-year-old on his knees. Samuel saw the photographs once. Then he handed them back and said, "Enough." Clara did not touch him. That was wise. Comfort has to be invited, and grief like his had been waiting 25 years without even the courtesy of a grave.
Eleanor Vane asked to speak to Samuel before she left with her solicitor. Ashcroft said it was Samuel's choice. Samuel said no. Not loudly, not dramatically, just no. Eleanor accepted it with a nod that looked almost judicial until her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. Edward watched from the end of the corridor. He did not feel sorry for her. Not exactly. At 17, she had turned a key because Daniel Cross told her to, because Marcus Reed was laughing too loudly, because Thomas Bell had made fear sound like a joke, because Clara Finch had been pushed away, because Andrew Price was scholarship, inconvenient, accusing, and therefore easier to punish. Then she had gone for Graves, or said she had. Then she had obeyed when Graves told them Andrew had run away. Obedience had become silence. Silence had become university. University had become law. Law had become judgeship. A whole life, built not on the one bad night alone, but on the decision made every day after it. Say nothing, become respectable, let the dead boy stay useful by staying gone. The law would decide what could still be punished. Edward already knew what could not be repaired. Headmaster Graves died 3 days later. That was inconsiderate of him, but not surprising. Old men who have carried rot for decades sometimes leave quickly after the room finally smells it. Before he died, he gave 1 formal statement and 3 useless ones. He confirmed that Andrew Price died in the lower archive room after being locked inside during an initiation. He confirmed that he moved the body with the help of the old groundskeeper, now conveniently dead, and staged Andrew's suitcase at the bus stop. He confirmed that the police report had been shaped through school influence, parental pressure, and a local officer who later became head of security for a Blackwood donor. He did not apologize in any meaningful way. He said the school would not have survived. Samuel, when told, replied, "Andrew didn't." That was the only line from the whole case Edward considered worth carving over the main entrance. Clara Finch published the first article 6 days after the reunion. She did not make herself heroic in it. That was smart and, more importantly, accurate. She wrote that she had seen Andrew taken toward the lower chapel corridor and failed to stop it. She wrote that she had gone to Graves and been threatened. She wrote that fear becomes easier to carry once adults teach you it is practical. She named Daniel Cross as blackmailer, not martyr. She named Dr. Ellery as the headmistress who tried to stop a speech and killed a man. She named Eleanor Vane, Marcus Reed, Thomas Bell, and Alistair Graves. She named Andrew Price in the first paragraph and again in the last. The article's title was simple, "The Boy Behind the Chapel Door." Edward read it once. Then he sent Samuel a message. She started in the right place. Samuel replied an hour later. For once. That was not forgiveness. It was better than performance.
Blackwood Hall closed for 2 weeks, then reopened under emergency governance. Schools, like fungi, were difficult to kill if the conditions remained damp and wealthy. Governors resigned. 2 more were pushed before they could resign attractively. Dr. Ellery's portrait was removed from the entry hall with less ceremony than had once been given to broken rowing oars. The scholarship fund was renamed after Andrew Price, which Edward considered predictable and morally hazardous. Samuel fought it, then agreed only if the fund's founding documents included the full account of Andrew's death and the school's concealment. The governors resisted. Samuel released the ledger scans to Clara. The governors discovered flexibility. It was educational. Daniel Cross received a large public funeral. Of course he did. Men like Daniel do not become small immediately after death. First, they pass through tribute. Politicians spoke of service. Colleagues spoke of brilliance. Friends spoke of charm. Nobody at the lectern said blackmail. Nobody said Andrew. Nobody said he had hidden a key inside a school cup and planned to auction off silence to the highest frightened adult in the room. But in the 4th row, Thomas Bell cried hard enough to look ridiculous and human. Marcus Reed did not attend. Eleanor Vane's name disappeared from the guest list after someone sensible realized cameras existed.
Clara Finch attended from the back and left before the final hymn. Samuel did not attend at all. Edward approved. 2 weeks later, Samuel buried his brother properly. It was a small service in the village cemetery below the school hill. No banners, no motto, no Latin. Just rain, wet grass, a plain coffin, Clara standing at the edge, Marcus at the gate but not entering, and Samuel reading a short statement in a voice that only broke once. He said Andrew liked maps, hated boiled carrots, wrote too small, and wanted to be an engineer. He said Andrew was not a symbol of institutional failure, not a lesson, not a scholarship legacy, not a tragic chapter. He was a boy, 15, asthmatic, frightened, locked behind a door by children and buried by adults. That was the version Samuel chose to give him. Edward stood beneath a yew tree at the back, because funerals were not his territory unless facts misbehaved. Ashcroft stood beside him. "Do you think this changes the school?" she asked. "Yes," Edward said. She looked surprised. "For how long?" "Until the next generation learns better vocabulary." "There it is. Accuracy is rude, usually from you." They watched Samuel place one hand briefly on the coffin before stepping back. Clara was crying now, quietly. Marcus left before anyone could speak to him. Thomas sent flowers and a note Samuel did not read. Eleanor sent nothing. That was the first intelligent thing she had done since the truth emerged.
That evening, Edward returned once more to Blackwood Hall. The police work was mostly finished, though the legal work had barely begun. The great hall was empty. The silver cup remained in evidence. The old class photograph was gone. In its place on the wall, someone had put a temporary blank board, which somehow looked more honest than any portrait. The motto above the stage still shone in gold, Per silentium et lucem. Edward stood beneath it for a while. Schools loved to claim they prepared children for the world. Blackwood had prepared its pupils for exactly the world many of them entered, one where polished words hid ugly bargains, where the right accent softened cruelty, where witnesses became liabilities, where locked doors could be renamed incidents if the report was typed neatly enough. It had not created monsters from nothing. That would have been too easy. It had taken frightened, vain, ambitious children and taught them that consequences were negotiable if handled by the right adult. Edward turned off the hall light before leaving. He was not supposed to. He did it anyway. Outside, the rain had stopped. The school stood dark on the hill, less grand without its windows lit. Stone survived. It always did. That was why people mistook it for virtue. Somewhere beneath the chapel, a sealed place had been opened. Somewhere in evidence, a key waited in a plastic bag. Somewhere in court files, Daniel Cross was becoming a victim, Dr. Ellery a defendant, Eleanor Vane a former judge, Alistair Graves a dead witness, and Andrew Price, finally, a person instead of an absence. Edward walked down the gravel drive toward Ashcroft's car. She was waiting by the gate. "New case?" he asked. "Not tonight. Rare mercy. Don't get used to it." He looked back once at Blackwood Hall. The school motto had been wrong. Silence had not led to light. Silence had led to a locked door, a hidden body, a polished cup, a poisoned habit, a shredded email, and 25 years of adults congratulating themselves on discipline. The light, when it finally came, had not been noble. It had been forensic. A ledger, a key, a brother, a journalist, a dead man's last word, a boy's name restored to the record. That was enough for one night. Not justice, not healing, not closure. Enough. Edward got into the car. Behind them, Blackwood Hall disappeared into the dark, still standing, still expensive, still wounded. For the first time in 25 years, it could no longer pretend the missing boy had run away. And that, Edward thought, was the beginning of whatever truth could survive the school.
Blackwood Hall taught silence better than it taught honor. 25 years ago, a scholarship boy disappeared after a night in the old chapel corridor. The school said he ran away. His classmates became respectable adults. The records were buried. Then, at their reunion, one of them raises the old silver school cup, drinks, and dies on stage. His last word is not a name, not poison, not help. It is one word: key. And Edward Hale realizes the key does not belong to tonight's murder. It belongs to the boy Blackwood erased.